Lionhelm, Senator Back.
Deputy President, thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to comment on the fact that yesterday was one of the most historic and memorable days in the Senate of the Parliament of Australia for both positive and negative reasons. Positively, we've seen the start of a process now in which the people of Australia can have their voice on issues about which I will discuss. And secondly, from a positive point of view, we restored the capacity and the centrality of the families of Australia, particularly the small business families of Australia, to get about doing the work that they do so well, Madam Acting Deputy President. On the negative side, we regrettably saw by one of our colleagues, the Deputy Leader of the Opposition in the Senate, a most unprecedented, unfair and cowardly attack on the person and the position of the Governor-General of Australia by Senator Stephen Conroy, in his response to the presence and the statements made by the Governor-General on behalf of the government and indeed on behalf of the Prime Minister, made comments along the lines that the Governor-General had demeaned his office. He drew attention to a past, now deceased, Governor-General and activities, made the observation, and I quote, "A strong Governor-General would never have agreed to undertake what the Prime Minister of the day had requested and what the Governor-General is required to do, and that the Prime Minister had used his position in advising the Governor-General in a way which Senator Conroy thought would never happen again." You know, the irony of all this, Acting Deputy President, is that constitutional experts have drawn attention to the error of Senator Conroy's comments. I quote from constitutional law expert from the University of New South Wales, George Williams, when he says, "If anything, the spectre of 1975 would have been raised if the Governor-General had acted contrary to the view of the Prime Minister. So I think he, Senator Conroy, has got it the wrong way around." And Professor Anne Toomey at Sydney University made this comment: "The reverse of what Senator Conroy is saying is the case. What was controversial," she said, "in 1975 was that the Governor-General refused to act on government advice and acted without it." Now, I call on Senator Conroy, the Deputy Leader of the Opposition in the Senate, and indeed the Labor Party's shadow spokesman on defence, to come into this place to reflect on the comments he has made, to agree with the statements of his own leader, Mr Shorten, and indeed the Prime Minister and others, and to apologise unreservedly to the Governor-General. If nothing else, Acting Deputy President, we know the person of General Peter Cosgrove, probably one of the most highly decorated and certainly one of the most successful military generals in this country's history. It was in 1999, September 1999, that the United Nations mission to East Timor charged Australia with the responsibility of bringing peace and good order to that country following its long years of conflict with Indonesia. And who was it that the Australian government appointed? None other than General Peter Cosgrove, to lead what became known as Interfet, one of the most successful military and peacekeeping operations in this country's history, led by Cosgrove. No injuries, no wounds were encountered. He led a contingent of people from 23 countries, involving in all some 11,000 people, and he did so with a high degree of military precision, and he brought enormous honour to this country. Madam Acting Deputy President, at that time I was undertaking business activities in Asia, including with an Asian military organisation. And when Cosgrove was appointed to lead Interfet, I recall being told by senior generals of that military organisation that we weren't good enough. Australia was going to end up with blood on its nose because its contingent and his leader simply were not capable of undertaking that work. So when we saw the effort yesterday by the Deputy Leader of the Senate and the shadow spokesman for Defence decrying the Governor-General of Australia, he was also placing abuse at the person of a military hero of this country. And I know Senator Conroy, I believe him to be a man of honour, and I believe the right thing he can and should do is to come into this chamber today, before we rise this evening, and to give an explanation to the Senate, to the people of Australia, and particularly to give an apology to His Excellency General Peter Cosgrove. Madam Acting Deputy President, what the Governor-General's speech indicated yesterday morning and the results of votes in this place yesterday afternoon is that we now have the true opportunity for the democratic process to take its part. We know that there was registered organisations legislation introduced into the lower house. It came here to the Senate and was rejected. It went back to the lower house and came to this place and was rejected. And of course it becomes what is known as a trigger for a double dissolution election. In other words, the government of the day elected to run this country is unable to bring forward its legislation. And secondly, as we saw played out yesterday, the Building and Construction Commission legislation was again rejected. It is important, Madam Acting Deputy President, for people in this gallery and others around Australia to know that in 2013 the then Leader of the Opposition on behalf of the Coalition, Mr Tony Abbott, took to the 2013 election the fact that we wanted to reinstitute the ABCC. The people of Australia overwhelmingly returned the Coalition to government and in so doing made it their position that they were happy with the introduction of that legislation. But yesterday we saw for the second time the rejection of legislation by the government of the day, and that of course has triggered also a double dissolution election. It is now time for the people of Australia to confirm their decision from 2013. And there could not be a more direct contrast, Madam Acting Deputy President. Drawing upon my own horse racing background, I can say to you the Labor Party is owned, trained, ridden and strapped by the union movement in this country. And what we are going to see over the next few weeks is a very, very clear description of the fact of who runs the Labor Party in this country. We saw evidence of it yesterday. We have seen evidence of it on two occasions yesterday, to which I will refer. The ABCC, the construction sector, the CFMEU, a huge donor, more than $7 million to the Labor Party for campaign purposes. And I'm delighted through you, Madam Acting Deputy President, that Senator McAllister is with us here in the chamber. Because it wasn't all that long ago I watched on television an interview with you, Senator McAllister, through you, Acting Deputy President, with the Honourable Paul Ferguson, and I recall you saying at the time that it is important to let the courts of Australia make the decisions when it comes to alleged unruly behaviour or dominance or bullying or the sort of standover tactics. I recall now, if I may, and I'd like to, through you, draw attention to Senator McAllister of what the courts have said and why it is so necessary for us to return to an ABCC. The Federal Court of Australia, a decision recently noting that comments such as "the last time it cost us a shitload of money and it's going to be expensive but our fighting fund will have to fix it," evidence on behalf of the CFMEU branch officials that the risk of imposition of significant pecuniary penalties will not be allowed to act as a constraint on lawful activity which they consider to be warranted. That's the response of the Federal Court of Australia, Senator McAllister, to the activities of the CFMEU, and more recently the Victorian Supreme Court. The New South Wales and other Supreme Courts have had similar experiences, and I quote the Supreme Court of Victoria saying, "The imposition of a penalty for contempt of court should not be viewed simply as an anticipated cost of industrial action. Few things could be more destructive to the authority of the court and to the rule of law than the idea that fines or similar punishment are akin to a tax that, once budgeted for, enabled the use of unlawful conduct to achieve industrial outcomes." That's been the response of the courts, the Federal and the Supreme Court. We have a look at the industry regulator itself, the FWBC, and it has advised that the spread of unlawfulness in the industry that was a feature of Victoria and our home state of Western Australia has now spread also to Queensland and South Australia. That's the Fair Work Building Regulators statement, not mine. As we know, Acting Deputy President, after 2007, when Labor came into government, and reminded of the fact that it took them some time anyhow, despite the pressure of the unions, to abolish the ABCC, they appointed Justice Murray Wilcox QC. We know him not to be a person of our political persuasion, and they asked him to review the industry in such a way as they could buy time before they abolished the ABCC. Justice Wilcox, Madam Acting Deputy President, recognised the need for and the benefit provided by the Australian Building and Construction Commission, stating in his report, and it wasn't welcomed by Ms Gillard at that time, but these are his words, I quote, "The ABCC's work is not done. It would be unfortunate," he said in his report, "if the ABCC's replacement body led to a reversal of the progress that has been made." And that is exactly what we have seen, and those are points that I'm delighted that Senator McAllister is in this place, to which I can refer. The CFMEU has undue and unruled power over the Labor Party. But, ladies and Acting Deputy President, through you to those in the public gallery, understand this: the construction industry in this country employs more than 1 million people. More than 1 million people. Small businesses, family businesses, the vast majority not members of unions or the CFMEU in particular. We know that this government, Madam Acting Deputy President, has placed enormous emphasis on construction, $55 billion for infrastructure projects. The evidence before us is that more than 1/3 of the cost of construction projects in this country are wasted as a result of industrial lawlessness. It is important for the taxpayers of Australia and the Australian community, in fact, that we do reduce and eliminate that wastage of 30% so that it can go into the very construction projects about which I speak. We know at this time the CFMEU has more than 100 of its officials before the courts around Australia. This is unconscionable, and what we saw yesterday was again the involvement of the Labor Party and the Greens political party, along with 4 of the independents, to vote down the reinstitution of the ABCC. We are looking at the largest infrastructure spend in Australia's history, and we know very well that should Labor get into government, Madam Acting Deputy President, we would see a continuation of the industrial lawlessness simply because those who pay the piper, as we know, call the tune. The other point of interest yesterday, as we all know, was that we passed legislation, or at least we voted to abolish the Heavy Road Safety Remuneration Tribunal. I listened to the contribution a few minutes ago from Senator Sue Lyons, talking about the problems associated with safety on roads in Australia and how bad this decision has been. The interesting thing is it was 2011 that the then Prime Minister Gillard, kowtowing to the Transport Workers Union, another owner, trainer and rider of the Labor Party, to actually institute this particular tribunal. If what Senator Lyons says is true about the tribunal being involved in heavy vehicle road safety, why have we not seen a significant reduction in the instances of accidents involving heavy vehicles? It's 2011 to 2016. We know very well that this particular tribunal was never introduced for the purposes of heavy vehicle road safety. There is already a national heavy vehicle regulator. If Ms Gillard and if the TWU at that time were truly interested, that's where they would have placed their resources. It is the fact that 85% of all major accidents involving trucks are not the fault or the responsibility of the driver. But we do know that had we not got rid of the tribunal yesterday, some 35,000 to 40,000 small businesses, owner truck businesses around this country, were already on their way to going to the wall as a result of the decisions of that tribunal. And it is interesting to reflect that back in 2011, even the Transport Workers Union said to Ms Gillard, "You should put some industry people on the tribunal," but no way in the world. And only recently did the TWU join the government and industry, asking the tribunal to delay its decision to axe and destroy the businesses of 35,000 people. Even the TWU joined that. But the tribunal, in its arrogance, Madam Acting Deputy President, ignored that advice, and so richly now have they been condemned to history with the abolition of that particular tribunal. And the opportunity now presents, and in contrast to what Senator Lyons said, when she made the claim the government has laid nothing out in terms of improving road safety, I invite her to go back and read the speech that I gave last night, and to also read the speech of my colleague Senator John Williams, who has been long a champion of the abolition of that organisation. So what does the future hold, Madam Acting Deputy President? What is the choice that the people of Australia have got? Well, I'll give you two quick examples. Firstly, the economy, and secondly, border protection and security. In 2007, this country was in surplus. We had no debt, we had no deficit. When Labor came into government, we were in surplus, the only Western country. By 2013, there was $100 billion of your money, accumulated deficits, and some $350 billion of debt. You are borrowing $1 billion a month offshore to pay the interest on that debt. You're not repaying the debt. You are now borrowing more than $1 billion a month out of your money offshore to repay that interest on that debt. So if you want to have a look at a contrast between the economic capacity of governments, you need go no further than to have a look at the last Labor government and the coalition government, because Acting Deputy President, as Senator Dastyari knows from his own background, the best predictor of future performance, the best predictor of future behaviour is past behaviour. So it will be a very, very clear decision for the people of Australia in making that circumstance. Look at the Labor Party's policies as they've already been stated. No attempt to reduce taxes in this country. An attempt to actually destroy investment incentive by their negative gearing opportunities. And has Mr Shorten or has the Shadow Treasurer, Mr Bowen, come out and explained the rationale? No, they haven't. In fact, as somebody said recently, the impact of this on people will be the equivalent of death duties. We know around Australia what the impact of the carbon tax has been. Would Labor reintroduce the carbon tax to the destruction of Australian families and business? Would Labor reintroduce the mining tax that had such a devastating impact in my home state of Western Australia? And I now turn, in the time left available to me, Madam Acting Deputy President, in terms of this country's border protection and security. Yes, it is a shame. You are right. I take that interjection. It is a shame, Madam Acting Deputy President. I'll tell you why. Because the Greens political party were part of the government of the Labor Party between 2007 and 2013, who produced the statistics that I speak of. In 2007, we did not have any illegal maritime arrivals and we had no children in detention. Between 2008 and 2013, during the time of the Labor-Greens government, there were more than 50,000, Madam Acting Deputy President, more than 50,000 illegal maritime arrivals. We know there were more than 1,200 people died at sea. We know there are more. We know exactly the 1,200 because they, regrettably, were pulled out of the water. We don't know how many more people died. There was a total of 8,000 children, of these maritime arrivals in detention during the time that Labor and the Greens were in government, and it peaked in July of 2013, just before the last election, at 1,992. I am proud on behalf of the government to announce today that as of the 3rd of April this year, the figures given to me is that there are no children of illegal maritime arrivals in detention in Australia. What would be the situation should Labor get back into government? Finally, Madam Acting Deputy President, I just simply want to contrast the two leaders. I want to contrast for the people of Australia who they will be voting for and who should be privileged to be the Prime Minister of the country after July of 2016 and lead this country. We have in Malcolm Turnbull a person with an exemplary business background, a person who has at all phases of his professional life been an employer, been a person who has stimulated employment, who has stimulated activity, who has been in the law, who has operated internationally and nationally, and we have in his opponent, Mr Shorten, a union hack, a person who has done nothing other than be in the union movement. He's never run a business, he's never employed staff, and this is the choice before the people of Australia on July the 2nd, 2016.
Thank you, Senator Back. Senator McCallum.